Virginia Governor Patrick Morrisey held a press conference Monday to unveil tax relief plans for the upcoming legislative session. Governor Morrisey announced a plan to cut income tax. Morrisey says that the state needs to do more to help everyday West Virginians with the rising costs of inflation. He wants West Virginia to be more competitive against neighboring states such as Kentucky and Ohio. Morrisey believes that cutting the income tax will, quote, tell investors that West Virginia is the best place to grow their businesses, end quote. He added that when businesses choose West Virginia, they will strengthen our local communities and keep younger workers home.
One of the proposals we'll make, we believe that we'll have an income tax reduction. We're going to work closely with the legislature on these numbers, but looking at least a 5 to 10%. That is my goal, but I want to work with them to be able to make sure that we're executing this the right way. I've had conversations with the House and Senate leadership, and I've expressed my interest in working closely with them on getting something that passes.
Governor Morrisey added that to move West Virginia forward, the state needs to cut red tape and be more competitive on their tax rates. Turning to the weather now, meteorologist